Prince Valerian had been born without sight. Among the Valerian elite, blindness was considered a fundamental flaw, a genetic defect that should have been corrected in utero. That it hadn't been was a scandal the royal family had never quite forgiven. So they'd hidden him, not cruelly by their standards. He had quarters, servants, access to resources. But he was excluded from family meals, banished from social functions, kept apart from the court proceedings where power was wielded. He sat alone in his chamber each cycle, eating in silence, denied the basic social rituals that defined belonging. He was 17 and had never shared a meal with another living being. Then Marcus arrived. The human boy was 14, hired as a junior servant through the palace employment agency. He was small, agile, quick to learn, the type of servant the Valorians used for menial tasks they considered beneath their own status. No one expected him to matter, to question, or to care about the blind prince hidden away in the eastern wing. But Marcus had a mother who was blind. He'd grown up watching her navigate a sighted world with grace and dignity, and he'd learned something fundamental. Blindness was a difference in perception, not a deficiency in worth. On his second cycle of employment, Marcus had been assigned to deliver the prince's evening meal. He'd arrived with a tray and had found Prince Valerian sitting in darkness. The prince always kept his chambers unlit, having long since accepted that light meant nothing to him. "Your meal, Your Highness," Marcus had announced, setting the tray down. "Leave it," the prince had responded, his voice hollow with the weight of perpetual isolation. "I will," Marcus had replied. "But first, I'd like to describe it to you, if you'd like to hear." The prince had gone still. "Why would you do that?" "Because eating alone is terrible," Marcus had said simply. "My mother always said the worst part of being blind wasn't the darkness. It was eating in silence while everyone else shared their meal together. So I'd sit with her and describe everything, the color of the food, how it smelled, the sounds of other people eating around us. Made it feel less lonely." The prince had been quiet for a long moment. "You would do this? For me?" "Of course," Marcus had said. "Where should I sit?" It had started as a small kindness. Each evening, Marcus would arrive with the prince's meal and would sit across from him, describing everything in vivid detail. The subtle purple hue of the roasted protein, the steam rising from the grain dish, the way the dessert sparkled with crystalline sweetness. But more than that, Marcus had talked about his day, about the palace staff, about the world beyond the prince's isolated chamber. The prince had begun asking questions. Where was Marcus from? What did his mother do? What was it like to grow up human on a world full of aliens? Marcus had answered everything, and slowly, impossibly, the prince had begun to smile. Other servants had noticed. They'd whispered about it. A human boy spending hours with the blind prince, talking to him as though he mattered, as though his blindness was irrelevant to his worth. Some had found it amusing. Others had found it inappropriate. No one had found it problematic enough to stop. The royal family had noticed as well. The prince's attendance at court functions had begun to be requested. He'd started asking questions during deliberations, offering perspectives that suggested he'd been listening, learning, engaging with the world despite his isolation. His father, the emperor, had begun to wonder if blindness was truly the defect he'd always assumed. One evening, after several months of shared meals, the prince had taken Marcus's hand. "I've been thinking about something," he'd said. "I used to believe that my blindness made me less valuable, that I couldn't contribute to the empire, couldn't fulfill my role as prince. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me that what I lack in sight, I can gain in other ways. Through your words, your companionship, your refusal to accept that I should sit alone. You're not less," Marcus had said firmly. "You were just isolated. Blindness is only a disability if the world refuses to accommodate it. You're not defective. They were just unprepared to see your value." The prince had squeezed his hand. "Will you continue to eat with me? Even after you're reassigned? Even after you move on to other duties?" "Always," Marcus had promised. "For as long as you want me to be your eyes, I will be." Within a year, the prince had become known as one of the empire's most insightful advisors. He'd established new protocols for accessibility across all royal institutions. And most importantly, he'd stopped eating alone. The blind prince and the human servant boy had become inseparable, not because the prince needed guidance, but because Marcus had understood something fundamental. Everyone needs someone to share their meal with. Everyone needs to belong. Sometimes the greatest revolutions weren't about changing systems or restructuring societies. Sometimes they were about one person simply deciding that another person deserved to not be alone.